The Exeter Impact podcast is returning for a second series. In Series 2, we talk primarily to colleagues working at our Penryn campus in Cornwall, making a significant impact. The podcast is developed and hosted by me, Emma Sheriff, Impact Evidence and Evaluation Manager for Policy and Systems at the university. Ivana, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
We're going to talk about your research on climate simulation and some other research that you've worked on today. Your research is fascinating. Can you give us some background to your research and how you came to be interested in this area?
Well, it all started about 30 years ago, and I was a student at Bath University doing my mathematics undergraduate degree. And two things happened in my second year. One, a film came out called The Outbreak. It was 1995, actually, and it had René Rousseau and Dustin Hoffman in it. And it was about scientists who are trying to save the world from a deadly virus. And I think the virus jumped species from primates to humans. And I thought this is such a fascinating topic, disease and human diseases, and how we can really combat them. And the second thing happened was that I was walking down the corridors of Bath University, and one of my professors had a poster on his wall saying mathematical modeling of cancer. And I thought, I had no idea that mathematics and mathematical modeling can help understand cancer. And I thought, well, if you can help understand cancer, maybe you can help understand transmittable diseases. So I knocked on the door and I said, this area is absolutely fascinating. I don't know anything about it. I want to study it. And a professor, it was Mark Chaplin, he helped me actually design what modules I'm going to take and how I'm going to sort of carry on through my final year. And that's where the fascination started. So it was 30 years ago. And from then on, I thought I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do mathematical modeling of diseases. And I worked with human diseases, plant diseases over the years. And this is how it all started.
And what are the mathematical techniques and technologies that you apply?
So mathematical models can help us explore different scenarios. So we can say these are the rules. Individuals they reproduce, they consume resources, they then multiply, they interact with each other, they infect each other, they cooperate, they antagonize each other. So we put all the different rules of interactions into the mathematical models and say, given different scenarios, what will pathogens do? Because understanding what's going on will help us predict how we can actually control the disease, how we can make it take a different course, how we can slow it down. So understanding the rules of interaction will help us then understand how to combat the disease, how to slow down the infectious diseases I'm talking about.
And how did you go about setting up the climate simulator?
Well, I was, as I said, working on modeling diseases, plant diseases, and human diseases. And one thing that struck me is that for the mathematical models to be useful, they need to be testable. So we need to be able to test those mathematical models. And the thing that was really important during COVID was trying to understand how disease spreads. And trying to understand how disease spreads will help us then understand how to stop the spread of disease. And we saw all these videos of slow motion of people sneezing and the water droplets traveling through air and infecting other people. And I thought, if we develop mathematical models that were so crucial for COVID, how do we test those mathematical models? How do we know that what we predict the pathogens will do and how they'll spread will really happen? And I thought, I was working with plant diseases, and I thought I would like to test my predictions on mathematical models on plant diseases, and realized that there was absolutely nowhere that I could test that. Because if you go into the field, you then try to test how disease would spread, you've got no control. You don't have control over the weather. The two important things are controllability and repeatability. If you can't repeat the experiment, you can't then draw any conclusions from it. But every day would be a different weather. There's all these other components in nature that would play a role in your outcome of a particular experiment. So you had no way of controlling it. And I thought it would be really good if we could actually have a controllable of the environments where we can then have a repeated experiment of testing how disease would spread under particular settings. And I realized there was no such thing at all within an experimental laboratory. And when disease spreads, the climate is so important because you need rain to lift pathogens off plant leaves. You need wind to spread them through the environment. So there's all these different things, and especially with human diseases as well. Once you're in the environment, depending on your climate conditions, humidity, wind, rain, temperature, they will all affect the spread of disease. But there was nowhere where we can actually experiment on this and model. So this is how I came about setting up a controlled chambers where we can simulate weather conditions from anywhere in the world. So we can actually input weather data from any weather station in the world, and we can almost simultaneously recreate those conditions inside the chambers. And then we can see how organisms and pathogens respond to different weather conditions. And that was something that there was certainly nowhere in the UK that could do it. And there's only a handful in Europe.
Sure. And how excited to launch something so new.
It was very, very, very exciting. It's a very exciting time to have this and to have such a unique thing in the whole country, to be the ones that have this facility is really exciting.
What would you say were your impact goals for the work at the outset, and why?
So when we applied to the funding for this facility, it was jointly met by Exeter University and the BBSRC. So initially, when we applied for the funding, we had stakeholders that were involved. So we had PepsiCo, there was a project partners, and they were actually interested in how sound, acoustic vibrations can improve productivity of sort of yields in plants and their metabolism. But to be able to understand how acoustic waves spread through, sort of travel through the air, you need to understand the climatic conditions around them. So they were very interested in conducting experiments of improving plant growth and plant metabolism in realistic weather conditions. So they were our project partners. We also had Syngenta, who were interested in looking at antimicrobial resistance and how antimicrobial resistance to their chemicals spreads in natural conditions.
Can you tell us about your other stakeholders? Who are they, and why are they interested in your research?
So after we've launched this climate simulator, which was in June last year actually, we have been talking to farmers and local food producers, people who are sort of organic food producers who are interested in trying to improve the health of their produce, but also the yield as well. And they are very interested in trying to try different strategies to combat disease in a controlled environment as well. So they want to understand what would be the best way of, say, combating disease in an organic way without using any sort of plant protection products, but testing it under different climate scenarios and different conditions. So they can try high rain, high humidity, lots of different environmental conditions. So the growers were very interested in understanding it or using the facility. But one unexpected, at least for me, stakeholder was the government and the DSTL. And we just have a PhD project that we're advertising at the moment with the DSTL to use the climate simulator because they're very much interested in how pathogens are lifted off surfaces, so be it natural surfaces or man-made surfaces. And this is very important in the defense and protection because if we have a particular pathogen that's been deposited on a particular surface, what will it take for that pathogens to be lifted off and then carried through the environment? And the STL, before actually talking to me, have tried to do those experiments in nature. And they were really, really struggling because first you have to have a pathogen that you might not necessarily want to experiment in nature, so you have to have a substitute for that pathogen. But secondly, every time they tried to conduct an experiment, there was a different environmental condition. So there was slightly more wind or slightly less wind or more rain. So it was really, really hard for them to pin down and understand if we have a particular climate scenario and there's a deposit of a pathogen that particularly can cause a lot of harm, how long it will take for that pathogen to spread through the population. And we can do that in the climate simulator. So we can put lots of different man-made surfaces. We can put concrete slabs. We can put, the different things that you find in everyday life that are man-made surfaces. And then we can test different scenarios and see how they would actually spread it. There's a lot of physics involved in the spread of the transport of pathogens through the air, because they have to lift off the surfaces by raindrops. So the size of the raindrops, the angle at which they fall would be really important. And that will help us calculate the trajectories, because once you know the angles of the way the droplet lands on the surface and this angle of expulsion of the pathogen, they can calculate the trajectories. So there's a lot of intricate details, mechanistic details that we can find out by having a climate simulator. We can have high-speed cameras and record frame by frame of how those pathogens travel through the air, just like COVID images that we saw on TV about the droplets traveling through air. So there's a lot of things that we can find out, and that was an unexpected application that we are pursuing at the moment.
That's really interesting. So when you're setting up these simulators, you can command the simulator to replicate certain conditions for each scenario.
Yes, exactly. And we can say, if something happens in the summer, this is the conditions that we're going to have. This is the average rainfall. We're going to have the wind speeds, how long it will take for a pathogen to spread certain distances if they're deposited on a particular surface. And then we can test what would happen when we have a different season, winter conditions, summer conditions. And then also we can say, as the climate changes, how we will be able to then what will that change in terms of how easy pathogens will be able to spread through the air. So we can, I call it a what-if scenarios. For example, just the one simple example is, this is what some of my colleagues were trying to do. Growers and breeders try to create different varieties of crops that will be resistant to pests, but also be hardy in certain weather conditions. So there's a lot of different cultivars that are being created. What the climate simulator can do is really put those cultivars through their paces and say, okay, what would be the best one to deal with the particular conditions? As the climate changes, we can input these different climate parameters and saying which cultivars perform better in those different changing environments. So we can really select the best, the growers can select the best cultivars that will help them long term and will perform best in different climatic conditions.
Fantastic. Can you tell us about your work with learners in education and connected to that Women in Science that you've been delivering?
Well, I'm really passionate about inspiring women to study STEM subjects. So there was a statistic that I was quite sort of surprised by, is that I'm in biology, and so there's a lot of females that would like to study biology, but not many of them choose to do mathematics at A levels or computer science or physics. And I was very similar, because I didn't understand what mathematics can do to the topics that I cared about, so about environment and health. So all of those sorts of things, I didn't realize that mathematics can help. So what I try to do is go to schools and talk to girls about the applications of mathematics beyond of what they learn in schools about. So being able to real world problems, to environmental problems, to problems that really can change our lives for better. And we go and speak to the girls. We've gone to, we've created a video, a little animation video based around the climate simulator, to say, just to demonstrate how to understand environment and health and disease. We really need quantitative subjects like mathematics, like physics, like I talked about, computer science. These are all really, really important subjects. So we, when the climate simulator was built, we went to Torquay Girls Grammar School, and we commissioned a local artist as well, which was a mural artist, and we came and presented I talked about my research and how STEM subjects are really important in biology. And then we had a workshop with the students to talk about the mural design and everything that they've learned from us talking about to them. They watched the animation, and then they helped the artists design the mural that's now on the climate simulator.
Fantastic. How inspiring for the girls participating in that activity with you. I can only imagine how exciting that day would have been for them.
It was a lot of fun, and I realized that 200 students in one room can make a lot of noise. It was a fun day. Yes.
And you've also been doing some exciting work with students of teaching. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So last sort of 3 or 4 or 5 years, we have final year undergraduate students that take final year projects with me. And we're looking into improving teaching evolution at secondary schools. So this is something that we would like to look at. Students learn best when things are visual. And when you talk about evolution, people think millions and millions of years. But microbes are great organisms to demonstrate evolution in action to students. So what we do is we work on designing experiments and lesson plans where we take non-pathogenic microbes. You can have like a baker's yeast and household products, and design experiments and lesson plans where we can take to schools and demonstrate to the students over a couple of days of actually how evolution happens and how resistance to certain products happens. So antimicrobial resistance, you can study yeast and lemon juice, and you can say how you can observe the evolution of yeast that were not able to grow in certain household products to then being able to grow on them. And that's really seeing evolution in action. So this is something that we then take to schools. And we do questionnaires, obviously, before and after, and try to assess what students have gained from it. And it's been overwhelmingly a positive experience of students really being interested in evolution and wanting to learn more.
Now, thinking about your pathways to impact, so your research is in a very early stage, it's not at completion. What pathways to impact do you plan to employ, do you think, and what will be interesting about them?
So with respect to the climate simulator, I think the way that we want to go is to organize a lot of stakeholder workshops. So we had an open ceremony that was for the funders, and that really worked well of showcasing what the climate simulator can do. So we have lots of different experiments that can take place in the climate simulator. For example, we can talk about plants a lot, but we also have research with bees and trying to understand how bees respond to different weather conditions. So there's a lot of studies with bees, but being able to watch them and observe them under different climate scenarios, it can tell us how climate change will affect certain behaviors. We have work that's studying how climate will affect flammability of trees. And again, this is a huge environmental issue. So we've got lots of different groups within Exeter are using the climate simulator. So organizing workshops and stakeholder engagements where we can bring people in from different groups. We can bring governmental groups, the agrochemical companies, educational, defense, and we have days organized where they can come and see the simulator in action and see the breadth of the research that can cover. It worked really well for the open day. So we are planning a whole host of engagement workshops. To me, the interaction with stakeholders, it's just learning to speak a different language. And I already had to do that from going from mathematics into biology. So finding a common language, and that takes time. And working on an interdisciplinary area has really taught me that understanding what people want to get out of a particular research might be different to what you want to get out of that research. So studying mathematics and studying biology, they're two very different things. So as a mathematician, learning to listen to the biologist and saying, this is the question that I want to answer. And this is not necessarily the most interesting mathematical question, but this is the questions that the biologists need to address. So this is what I need to focus on. And it's similar with stakeholders. It's understanding what their goals are and what they want to achieve, and then applying our tools and techniques to help achieve those goals. I see it as another strand to the interdisciplinarity.
And on that note, finally, what one single piece of advice can you share with our listeners and viewers to ensure their research impact is achieved?
So the best piece of advice that I got when I started, I had a NERC fellowship, so the Environmental Mathematics and Statistics fellowship that I had. I brought that fellowship as a mathematician into a biology department. And the piece of advice that the head of the department gave me was to be open and be open-minded. So everybody's in their own disciplines. Everybody's focused on their disciplines. And being able to be open and listen to what other disciplines or stakeholders need and require, what they're interested in, is really important.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time today, Ivana. Thank you for participating in the Exeter Impact podcast. You've been a great guest.
Oh, thank you very much for the invitation. I had a great time. Thank you.
Exeter staff can access the university's Impactful Researcher training series and find details of our impact surgeries via the episode links for support to plan impact in readiness for writing an impact case study.